Oh, hey, I didn't expect to see you here. You know, I've been doing a little hitchhiking throughout the United States, and I came across a rather friendly family. They asked me if I'd like to come over for dinner, but in the meantime, since I have you here, we might as well talk about the X-Files. Today we're checking out Home, episode 2 of season 4. Home is probably the most controversial episode in this series and follows Mulder and Scully as they investigate the dug-up remains of an infant and a homicidal clan of inbreds. So everyone gather the kids around because this one is for the whole family. The episode begins as a very inviting and friendly group welcome the arrival of the newest member of their family. Sensing something seems to be off with the child, the men decide to do the only thing they can think of and bury it alive. We're not 2 minutes into the episode and we're already dealing with infanticide. Also, the burial of the child reminds me of this scene from Evil Dead. We then cut to a group of children playing baseball out in the field, and remember when kids played outside? Anyways, the kids are having a gay old time when one of them finds the bloody remains of the baby, which is something I'm not sure I could have recovered from if I found it. Thus brings Agents Raynard Muldrake and Diana Lesky on the scene.
Meanwhile, I've quit the FBI and become a spokesperson for the ab roller.
Smell that.
Despite the remains of an infant child being dug up, Mulder is more focused on baseball and his love of small-town living.
It'd be like living in Mayberry.
Agents Mulder and Scully? Hi. I'm Sheriff Andy Taylor.
For real?
Sheriff Andy Taylor called in Mulder and Scully because something like this, in a town of only a few hundred, is strange to say the least. Mulder asked the sheriff if maybe the family that lives right by the crime scene had anything to do with it. The sheriff sort of shrugs it off and explains the Peacock family, or what's left of them anyways, keep to themselves. They're odd folk who shy away from normal society, and it's speculated at least that there might be some inbreeding going on. But it couldn't be possible that any child came from that house. It's just the 3 boys. Their parents died years ago in a car crash. It honestly feels like the sheriff is having a hard time admitting to himself that something this horrific could have happened in his small town. Anyways, they've gotten all they can from the crime scene, so now it's time to check on the baby, which is the least disgusting thing in this refrigerator. Ugh, spam!
By the way, this is my deputy, Barney.
Fife?
Pastor.
They don't have a morgue of any kind, so Scully is forced to examine the baby in a tiny-ass bathroom that looks to be sponsored by this toothpaste. The poor baby seems to have every single birth defect that you can possibly imagine. But it wasn't the birth defects that killed the child. As Scully discovers, the child inhaled dirt, so it was definitely buried alive. You know what would make this scene really awkward? If they included a little sexual tension between Mulder and Scully.
Oh, that was my pen line.
Well, the long-standing curiosity had just been satisfied.
I don't know who thought it would be a good idea to place a joke here about Scully touching what could have been Mulder's dick, but there's a reason this is a deleted scene. Mulder and Scully then have a little chit-chat about children and motherhood, and I believe this is the first time that Scully has kind of made it known that she would like to be a mother at some point. I mean, she doesn't come right out and say it, but the way she talks about the baby and what stress the mother must have been under definitely hints that it's something that's important to her. But with what the sheriff mentioned about the Peacocks and all the abnormalities with the child, maybe it did come from the Peacocks, and she suspects that they could have a woman trapped there against her will. So the two decide they're gonna pay the Peacocks a little visit. Hilariously, Scully tells Mulder they can't just enter the house because they don't have probable cause. But when the hell has that stopped them in the past? They spot a pair of scissors on a table, and I guess that's all the convincing they needed to head inside. Now the scissors are covered in blood, and there are bloody footprints everywhere, but this shouldn't be shocking as they did walk past a discarded pig head.
They match.
Scully makes a match of the footprints and they discover the bloody shovel. However, it looks like the brothers took a hike before the agents arrived. They are being watched by someone though, who really seems to have some breathing issues. Scully then calls up the sheriff and tells him what they found, so Sheriff Taylor puts out an arrest warrant for the Peacocks. Meanwhile, it looks like the Peacocks are getting ready for a little night on the town.
Mulder, this lock is broken.
You don't have to lock your doors around here.
There's been an ongoing theme in the episode about not having to lock your doors or carry weapons because of how safe the town is, but even cutting back to the sheriff, he looks at his gun knowing that the modern world is beginning to take over, and he's losing that safe feeling they all once had.
Andy, what are you doing?
Taking one good last look around before it all changes.
What happens next is quite possibly one of the most disturbing scenes to ever appear in an episode of The X-Files. Under the guise of Wonderful Wonderful by Johnny Mathis, the Peacock clan make their way to the sheriff's home and brutally attack him and his wife. What makes things even worse is the sheriff's poor wife watches her husband get beaten to death and then has to try and keep quiet while the pool of his blood creeps towards her. The wife's death isn't shown, but instead the camera pulls away from the house while the sounds of her beating are drowned out by the music. For me, this is actually even scarier than the husband's death because I'm of the mindset that less is more. What you don't see is usually scarier than what you do because your mind can paint an image that is far more horrific than anything someone can show you on film or TV.
I came over to give him these reports and I found them.
The following morning, Deputy Barney Pastor is the unfortunate bastard who discovers the bodies and immediately contacts Mulder and Scully.
I think they may have a woman captive up there who may have sustained life-threatening injuries while giving birth. Who knows what those men have done to her? I think that we should go up there right now.
Upon looking over the grisly scene, they decide it's time to bring the Peacocks in. Mulder wants to wait for some backup because they're slightly outnumbered. That is until Deputy Barney comes in, acting like Charles Bronson, just waving his little gun around. Things take a disgusting turn when the Peacock brothers all ready themselves for the arrival of the agents and, something else. Well, the agents and deputy make it to the Peacock farm, and just in case, they're all gonna wear some bulletproof vests.
Are these vests absolutely necessary, Deputy?
I've seen him fire muskets before. I, for one, am not getting taken out by some antique.
The deputy takes the front door so the agents can make their way around back, but like Macaulay Culkin with Prep Time, the Peacocks have booby-trapped their home.
Pastor, no!
I would just like to point out that this town has lost its entire police force because Mulder and Scully decided to enter the Peacock's home without having a reason to do so. The Peacocks rejoice over the murder of the deputy, and Mulder and Scully have to find a way of getting them out of the house. Well, they let the Peacock's livestock free using the sheep password from the children's movie Babe.
No review. No review. Baram you.
So the pigs are set free and the Geico caveman starts freaking out, which gives Mulder and Scully an opportunity to get inside their home. However, they need to be very careful because, like Barney found out, their place is booby-trapped. They check the house and don't come up with much, though Mulder isn't too happy when he finds a newspaper announcing the death of Elvis. Are we sure these people are inbreds and not just what happened to the characters from the Twilight Zone episode, The Masks? Alright, so their family weren't exactly known for their looks, but what's this under the bed?
It's all right, ma'am. We're federal agents. We're here to help you. We're here to help you.
Oh, thank God. The agents found the kidnapped woman. She really needs to shut the hell up, though, before she alerts the Peacocks. We then get one of the biggest WTF moments in the series when it's revealed this woman is actually the boy's mother. She barely survived the car crash that took her husband's life, and her boys brought her back home and patched her up best they could. And it only gets even more messed up because it seems as though the oldest brother is also the father of the younger two, and the baby from the beginning? I mean, just look at Mulder's face when he realizes just what the f*** is going on.
The way I think it goes here is that Edmund is the brother and father of the other two.
Which means that when Edmund was a kid, he could ground the other two for playing with his things?
With this family fun revelation, they still need to bring the men in. They did murder 3 people after all. Mulder sends Scully off to speak with the mother and hopefully convince her to give up her sons. Mulder, on the other hand, decides to keep watch. Scully learns some interesting things about the Peacocks. According to the mother, they don't feel pain, which explains how the sheriff's bat swing was shrugged off by the sons earlier.
I can tell you don't have no children. Maybe one day you'll learn to love when you know your boy will do anything for his mother.
I don't even know what to say at this point. The Peacock boys finally realize that maybe someone is trying to distract them. They rush back to the house and Mulder tries to hold them off, but even shooting his gun in the air doesn't seem to deter them. One of the sons somehow sneaks in behind Mulder, but luckily Scully shoots before anything can happen. The son immediately gets back up, and I have to call shenanigans. Okay, so they don't feel pain. But what does feeling pain have to do with taking a bullet directly to your chest? More than likely, that's gonna take you out. Smart enough to set up traps, not smart enough to remember where they are. Mulder and Scully manage to take out the two younger brothers, but the older one and the mother are suddenly gone somehow. I don't know how he managed to wheel his limbless mother out without anyone noticing, but they not only evade the agents, they're going somewhere new so they can start their fucked up family all over again. Home might be my favorite episode in the series. There's a lot of good episodes, but this one is just so dark and disturbing. It's funny though, because looking at what's acceptable on TV today, it feels kind of tame in a sense. The subject matter is messed up, but I think if this had come out today, it would have been a lot more graphic and probably would have shown a lot more. A lot of what happens in Home occurs off screen or is implied, and I think that adds to just how disturbing and grimy the whole thing feels. It harkens back to the old days of the Grindhouse movies, these low-budget sleazy films that go out of their way to shock the audience. You can see the inspiration from movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, about a group of friends that are picked off one by a cannibalistic family, and Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes, about a vacationing family that are also the target of a clan of cannibals. Home is a perfect horror-themed episode and marked the return of writers Glenn Morgan and James Wong. The two men left after writing the episode Die Hand die Verletzt, which is also a pretty grim horror episode, to create the show Space Above and Beyond. However, unfortunately for the writing duo, the show was cancelled after only its first season. So with their tails tucked firmly between their legs, the two men came crawling back begging for work. They knew since they were coming back, they had to make an impact, so they decided to create the most twisted and disturbing piece of television that anyone had ever seen before. When they showed Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz their ideas for the episode, Chris was just like, alright, and that was that. There was no pushback against what they wanted to do, and Chris just let them write it. Glenn did get a phone call from Charlie Goldstein, who was head of production, who said, "You're sick. You're fucking sick," and immediately hung up. So not everyone was a fan of their ideas. Glenn and James felt bad for the cancellation of Space Above and Beyond, so in the initial planning stages of Home, they considered including several actors from that show as the brothers. However, they eventually decided against this idea because what a consolation prize that would have been. Sorry your show got cancelled, how's about you play some inbred monsters? They did manage to get Tucker Smallwood on to play the sheriff, but when he read the script, he was shocked. He didn't know much about the X-Files and even asked some of the crew if the show was always so vile, to which they responded, "This is awful even for us." Home would take inspiration from films I've already mentioned like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Hills Have Eyes, but also the 1992 documentary Brother's Keeper, a documentary about the murder mystery of one of the Ward brothers. Four simple men who kept to themselves away from society and who were rumored to be the result of inbreeding, though I'm not sure if that was ever proven or if it was just to sensationalize the crime. The film goes into the trial of Delbert Ward and whether or not he murdered his brother as a kind of mercy killing because of how ill he was, or if the brother simply passed away due to his ailments. A very depressing documentary and not one I can outright recommend. Glenn Morgan also took inspiration from Charlie Chaplin's autobiography. In the book, Charlie Chaplin described his life traveling the countryside of London with a theater troupe. He would often stay in the cheapest accommodations he could find, and on one such trip in Wales, Charlie stayed with a family in an old miner's house. One day after dinner, Charlie was treated by the host of the house to a performance by a man with no legs who crawled out from under the kitchen cupboard where he had apparently been sleeping. The man began to perform for Charlie, and in his book, Charlie said, "A half man with no legs, an oversized, blonde, flat-shaped head, a sickening white face, a sunken nose, a large mouth, and powerful muscular shoulders and arms, crawled from underneath the dresser. 'Hey Gilbert, jump,' said the father, and the wretched man lowered himself slowly, then shot up by his arms almost to the height of my head. How do you think he'd fit in with the circus? The human frog." I was so horrified I could hardly answer. However, I suggested the names of several circuses that he might write to. This stuck with Glenn for years, and when the time finally came to write home, he knew he had to include it, though he sort of misremembered what happened in the book, because when he wrote the episode, he thought the man had no limbs at all and sort of flopped around like a fish while his family sang and danced around him. It was also James Wong's idea to change the limbless man into the mother.
And the family starts playing and the guy flops around and Chaplin is just horrified. And when they're done, they put him down and put him back under the bed, and he gets the hell out of there. And I'm like, oh my God. Just for whatever it is, from 1980, I probably read that. And so this is 1997. And we're in the room. I'm like, I gotta do this. And it was a brother under the bed, and Jim Wong, eating pork rinds goes, it's the mother under the bed. And as I said, I see Sigmund Freud and Joseph Campbell doing backflips at the idea of that.
Once the script was completed, director Kim Manners, who took on the task of directing the episode, felt it was one of the best horror scripts he had ever seen, while many of the producers felt the entire thing to be in poor taste. For filming, they reused the house from the episode Aubrey for the Peacock home. It was an abandoned home that, according to producers, hadn't been touched in years and was so good that they had to use it again. The white Cadillac on the Peacock farm was a car that they just found on someone's property. They rented it from the owners, restored the vehicle, and even received a thank you letter from Cadillac for putting it in the show. For how dark and disturbing the content was, it's almost surprising that they didn't tell the producers that they couldn't use the car, which wouldn't have surprised me in the slightest if they had. Glenn was inspired by films like The Birds and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and how they used calm and joyful music to juxtapose against something horrific happening. So for the scene when the Peacocks would attack the sheriff and his wife, Glenn wanted to use Wonderful Wonderful by Johnny Mathis. Producers sent a copy of the script to Johnny so they could hopefully get his version of the song. However, Johnny was appalled by what he read and refused to give them permission to use it. Glenn just had to have it for the episode though, because there was just an eeriness to it, especially the haunting whistling sounds heard throughout. So since they couldn't use the Johnny Mathis version, they decided to record a cover. Producer David Nutter, who apparently had a background as a singer, came in and was like, hey guys, I'll sing this song. And Glenn was all, get the hell out of here, Nutter. Instead, Frank Spotnitz found an actor named Kenny James who almost sounded identical to Mathis. This song would lead into one of the most horrific parts of the episode, but one where the producers had an unexpected ally: standards and practices. The X-Files has had a lot of trouble with standards and practices in the past, but for whatever reason, they actually helped with any pushback this episode would have received. Linda Shimasuna was brought in to help edit the Wonderful Wonderful scene and a few others, and it was actually her that was telling Glenn, James, and Kim to add more bashing or more blood. The only real pushback they received was from the opening sequence with the baby. They didn't like that the baby sounded healthy and felt people would be aghast if a healthy baby was buried alive. But if the baby sounded unhealthy or sickly, then it wouldn't be as much of a concern. The Peacocks might be inbred, but they aren't monsters. When Kim Manners filmed the scene from the child's perspective of being buried alive, he said it was the most awful shot of my career. When Home finally released, it caused quite the ruckus. First off, it was the only X-Files episode to ever receive the TVMA rating, and the first to ever have a viewer discretion warning before airing. The content in Home was so shocking that Fox vowed that they would never air it again, and they didn't. Well, until 3 years later, when it was given a special airing for Halloween. After the episode came and went, the Peacocks were set to return, just not on the X-Files. Glenn Morgan was also showrunner for Chris Carter's other show, Millennium, and because the ratings were sort of in the dump, though if you compare Millennium's ratings to just about anything that comes out today, then Millennium would be considered a smash hit. Glenn decided to bring the Peacocks into the fold because he felt it would help boost the show's ratings, and the Peacocks would fit right into the darker tone of Millennium. The idea made it all the way to Peter Roth, the head of Fox TV at the time, and when he called Glenn back, he said,
Fox lobbyist in Washington called and somehow got wind and said, those characters never appear on television again.
So unfortunately, we never did get to see the Peacock clan again. Although years later, Glenn would play a nasty little trick on the fans when the show was set to return in 2016. The episode titles were revealed ahead of the revival series airing, and amongst them an episode titled Home Again. This drove the fans wild with speculation, because what else could it be but the return of the Peacocks? Well, instead it was some band-aid nosed man that rips people apart or some shit. I don't know, I saw it once and I barely remember it. The reason why it was called Home Again was because it shared similar themes about motherhood, and Glenn considered it part of an unofficial trilogy of episodes, which would be Home, Never Again, and Home Again. He really seemed to take some sick pleasure in pulling the rug out from under us too, the bastard. Home currently sits at an 8.8 on IMDb, and I really do love how sick and twisted this one is. And like I said, this might be my favorite episode in this series. I rarely do this with anything, but I think if I were to give this one a number rating, I might have to go with a 10. This episode just has everything I want in a horror-themed X-Files episode. Next up, we have an episode that has a lot to live up to, as Mulder and Scully investigate the disappearances of black men that may be the result of an ancient African folktale in Taliko. So what does everyone think of Home? Let me know down in the comments because I'm dying to know. Well, it turns out I misunderstand what the family was saying, and they were actually inviting me over to be dinner, not have dinner. So while I figure out how I'm getting out of this conundrum, have yourself a great day. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video, and stay spooky.
Please! Shut up! Let them kill me!
Remember the house your parents warned you to stay away from? This Friday.
Oh my God.
You'll understand why.
This is our home, and this is the way it's gonna stay.
A brand new X-Files, Friday.